Have you ever wondered why some people find peace and freedom as they grow older while others feel trapped in their relationships? It's a thought that might have crossed your mind, especially as you age. The truth is, as we get older, having a partner may not always be the blessing people assume it is. In fact, for many, it can become like a slow and silent poison, draining their energy, limiting their choices, and turning what should be peaceful years into something more stressful than they need to be. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever felt like maintaining a relationship at this stage of life takes more than it gives? You're definitely not alone in feeling this way. In this video, we're going to dive deep into 5 key reasons why having a partner in your later years can actually make life harder rather than easier. But before we begin, let me make one thing clear. Understanding these reasons does not mean that companionship is something to avoid altogether. It's about having the wisdom to see the full picture. It's about knowing when staying single might just be the best choice for your well-being. So stick with me until the end, because what we're about to discuss might just change the way you view relationships in your later years forever. Reason 1. The emotional burden of constant compromise. As we grow older, we start to realize something important. Our tolerance for unnecessary stress starts to decrease. When we were younger, compromise was part of the game. We were willing to adjust our habits, preferences, and even our goals to keep the peace, right? But as you age, things start to change. You may begin to notice that the compromises you once thought were worth it start to feel like a burden. Simple daily choices, what to eat, where to go, how to spend time, can turn into endless discussions that drain your energy. Take Robert, for example. Robert is 74 and has spent decades adjusting to his wife's needs. He loved her deeply, but he realized that his own desires had taken a back seat for years. Now in his later years, all he wants is to enjoy his mornings in peace and silence. But his wife insists on watching loud TV the moment she wakes up. Does that sound familiar? Small issues like this can accumulate over time, turning what was once a loving partnership into a series of frustrating compromises. Here's the truth. At a certain point in life, you should no longer feel obligated to accommodate every preference of another person at the cost of your own happiness. It's not selfish. It's about prioritizing your peace of mind. How many of us end up in a cycle of reassuring, apologizing, and adjusting, all while we're the ones silently sacrificing our own joy? When you reach this stage, ask yourself, is this still working for me? Are you truly happy in your relationship, or are you stuck in emotional routines that drain you? Reason 2. The loss of true independence. One of the greatest freedoms of old age is the ability to finally live life on your own terms. After decades of responsibilities, raising children, working, maintaining relationships, you've earned the right to do as you please. But wait, being in a relationship often means your choices are still tied to someone else's needs, habits, and expectations. It's like being free, but still being tethered by invisible strings. Let's talk about Frank. Frank is 78 and spent his whole life as a dedicated husband. After his wife passed away, he realized something: he had never truly made decisions just for himself. His entire life was about compromise. Where they lived, what they ate, how they spent their time. When he finally experienced true independence, he felt something unexpected: the joy of waking up with no obligations or schedules dictated by someone else. Can you imagine that feeling? For many older couples, even when you're happy together, the fact remains. You're constantly coordinating schedules, checking in with each other, and adjusting plans to accommodate one another. But here's the kicker. In old age, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the ability to live without those invisible restrictions. You might not realize how much of your independence has been conditioned by years of adapting to someone else's needs until you step away from that dynamic. Reason 3. The emotional exhaustion of constant compromise. When you're younger, compromise is part of growth. It teaches patience, understanding, and teamwork. But as you age, it can slowly become something you no longer have the energy for. It's like having a leaky faucet. At first, it's just a drip, a minor annoyance. But over time, those little leaks add up, and soon you've got a flood on your hands. Take Robert again. At 74, he spent decades in marriage. He loved his wife, but the compromises wore him down. Little things like watching movies he didn't enjoy, dining at restaurants he didn't like, and adjusting daily routines, all for her. It wasn't that he didn't love her, but over time it became exhausting. When his wife passed away, Robert expected loneliness. Instead, he felt a deep sense of relief. Why? Because now he could finally do what he wanted, when he wanted, without constantly considering someone else's preferences. If you're still with me, think about it. Is there a point in your life when you just need peace of mind? The ability to make decisions without debating or compromising with someone else. Reason 4. The burden of caretaking. We all want to think of long-term relationships as a source of comfort, support, and love in our later years. But what many don't realize is that with age, the responsibility of caring for a partner can be overwhelming. Let's take James as an example. At 77, he had been married for over 50 years. When his wife became ill, he stepped into the role of caretaker. What started as small tasks, helping with medications, providing emotional support, soon became a full-time job. And this is a harsh reality for many elderly couples. As one partner's health begins to decline, the other often takes on the role of caretaker, a role that can consume their life and leave them with little time or energy for themselves. James found himself physically and emotionally drained, his own health deteriorating because of the overwhelming demands of caregiving. If you've ever cared for someone in this way, you know just how hard it can be. The irony is that by the time one partner passes away, the other is often in worse health than if they had been living independently. Reason 5. The financial and emotional strain of late-life partnerships. Many assume that having a partner in old age will bring comfort and security, but for some it brings stress, financial strain, emotional burdens, and feelings of obligation that can overshadow what should be a fulfilling final chapter in life. Let's revisit Robert for a moment. At 80, he was living comfortably on his savings and pension until he entered a new relationship. Suddenly, he found himself covering his partner's financial struggles, paying for shared living expenses, medical costs, and even helping her adult children. What started as companionship quickly became a financial obligation. This isn't an uncommon scenario. For many seniors, relationships later in life become financially complex, leading to stress and emotional turmoil. How many of you can relate to feeling trapped in a relationship because of financial dependence? The truth is, those who remain single often report feeling more in control of their financial future. They make decisions about money without the added strain of considering another person's needs or expenses. And with that control comes freedom. Final thoughts. As we move through life, the decisions we make about our relationships, especially in our later years, become incredibly important. Aging should be about freedom. Freedom to make your own decisions. Freedom to live without unnecessary burdens. So what's your take on this? Do you believe that companionship in old age is truly the key to happiness? Or do you see how it might limit your freedom? Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are you maintaining relationships out of habit, fear, or obligation, or are they truly bringing you joy? Your later years should be about living the life that serves your happiness. Sometimes that might mean walking away from relationships that no longer serve you. As we age, relationships can take on a different dynamic than when we were younger. When we're young, we may find joy in the give and take of partnerships, as we learn to adjust, adapt, and compromise to maintain harmony. However, as the years pass, the emotional burden of constant compromise can become overwhelming. It's like carrying a weight that at first feels manageable, but grows heavier with time, until it starts to feel like it's suffocating rather than supporting us. When we were younger, we often found joy in adjusting our habits and preferences for the sake of the relationship. We were willing to compromise on where to go for dinner, what to watch on TV, or how to spend our free time because it felt like part of the journey of being in a relationship. It was a natural part of the process, and most of us didn't think twice about it. But as we get older, things begin to shift. The energy and patience needed to constantly accommodate someone else's needs and preferences can start to feel more like a drain than a source of joy. We begin to question whether the sacrifices we're making are really worth it. This emotional burden becomes more pronounced as the years go by, and simple daily decisions can turn into exhausting debates. Something as trivial as what to eat for dinner or where to go on vacation can morph into an endless negotiation, leaving both parties feeling drained and frustrated. It's no longer about just compromising for the sake of the relationship. It becomes about managing the weight of someone else's expectations and desires. Take the example of Robert, a 74-year-old man who spent decades adjusting to his wife's needs and desires. Over the years, his own wants and preferences took a back seat to keep the peace. Robert loved his wife, but after decades of adjusting to her routines, he realized that his own desires had been neglected. In his later years, he craved peace and quiet in the mornings, a time when he could sit with his thoughts and enjoy his coffee in silence. Yet his wife insisted on having the TV blaring as soon as she woke up, a habit that had started innocently enough, but had become a source of frustration. For Robert, This seemingly small issue symbolized a larger pattern of emotional exhaustion that had built up over time. What's striking about Robert's experience is that this emotional burden isn't always obvious until it becomes overwhelming. At first, the little compromises don't seem like a big deal. After all, no one really minds making small sacrifices for the sake of keeping things harmonious. But eventually, those little sacrifices add up. The problem isn't the individual compromises themselves, but the emotional toll they take over time. The constant need to adjust, reassure and accommodate can leave a person feeling emotionally drained, like they're carrying a heavy load of unmet needs and unspoken frustration. In our younger years, we often have the energy to make compromises without feeling as if we're losing ourselves. We may even take pride in the ability to be flexible, to adapt, and to find common ground with others. But as we age, we begin to understand that our emotional energy is finite. The constant effort to meet someone else's needs can start to feel less like a shared responsibility and more like an obligation. This is particularly true when the compromises are not reciprocated, when our own desires and needs are continually overlooked in favor of someone else. At some point we begin to ask ourselves, is it worth it? The harsh reality is that a relationship that drains your emotional energy in old age is no longer serving you in the way it once did. While companionship can offer support and comfort, it can also come with a heavy emotional cost. It's important to recognize that as we grow older, we have earned the right to prioritize our own well-being. Peace of mind should become a top priority. Yet so many people remain in relationships out of habit, not because they genuinely bring happiness or fulfillment. They may stay because they fear being alone, or because they've grown accustomed to the emotional routines that have become ingrained over the years. The truth is that many people in relationships for years often don't realize how much lighter life could be if they stepped back from the emotional burdens they've been carrying. The sense of freedom that comes from not having to constantly manage someone else's emotions, decisions, and needs is incredibly liberating. Imagine waking up every day without feeling like you have to adjust your plans or preferences to accommodate someone else. Think about how it would feel to make decisions based purely on what brings you joy and peace, rather than always considering how your choices might affect someone else. This is not to say that relationships are inherently bad or that they don't bring value as we age, but it's crucial to understand that in old age, our needs change. We need more emotional freedom, more room to enjoy our own desires without feeling guilty or exhausted by constant compromise. It's about finding a balance between maintaining healthy connections with others and protecting our own peace of mind. At a certain point, the emotional cost of keeping a relationship alive may outweigh the benefits, and the true gift of aging may lie in having the courage to let go of what no longer serves us. As we age, one of the most cherished desires is to experience true independence, an opportunity to finally live life on our own terms. After decades of fulfilling responsibilities, whether it's raising children, managing a career, or navigating the complexities of relationships, the prospect of being free to make decisions based solely on our own wants and needs becomes incredibly appealing. Yet when we are in a relationship, that freedom can become compromised. While companionship can be a beautiful part of aging, it often comes at the expense of independence, which may be more detrimental than we realize. In the early years of life, we are conditioned to collaborate, share and adjust. This is an essential part of relationships, whether it's romantic or familiar. We are used to checking in with someone else before making decisions, considering another person's preferences and needs before making plans, and adjusting our routines around those of others. But as we move into later stages of life, there is often a longing for freedom from these shared responsibilities. After spending a lifetime compromising, the desire for independence becomes more pressing, and yet relationships can make it difficult to fully embrace it. Take Frank for example. At 78 years old, he had spent his entire life as a devoted husband, putting his wife's needs before his own, making decisions based on what was best for the both of them, and adjusting to her preferences in every aspect of life. But when his wife passed away, Frank suddenly found himself with a newfound freedom he had never known before. He discovered the joy of waking up without any obligations, of not needing to consult anyone before deciding what to do with his day, of no longer being bound by another person's schedule. He realized that for all those years, his life had been structured around the needs and desires of someone else. And now, for the first time, he had the freedom to do whatever he wanted. It was a startling revelation for him. He hadn't realized how much of his personal autonomy had been sacrificed in the name of love and partnership. The routines that had once seemed natural, the coordinated schedules, the compromise over small decisions, had over time eroded his ability to make choices that were entirely his own. Living alone after his wife's passing, gave him the opportunity to rediscover his own desires, and he realized how much joy there was in making decisions based solely on his happiness, without having to consider someone else's feelings or preference. Even in happy relationships, this loss of independence can be felt. Many older couples struggle with the reality of having to adjust their plans, schedules, and routines to accommodate each other. In a relationship, even simple decisions, like what to have for dinner or when to travel, require consideration of the other person's preferences. This means that spontaneity is often lost, as decisions are now influenced by the needs and desires of a partner. There's a sense of being tied down, as every action and choice feels like it must be made in collaboration with someone else. What is often overlooked is the impact this can have on our mental and emotional well-being. The constant balancing act of considering someone else's needs can start to feel like a restriction rather than a partnership. For many, the joy of deciding what to do with their day, what hobbies to pursue, or where to go on vacation becomes clouded by the obligation to take another person into account. These limitations on our freedom, while seemingly small, can add up over time, creating a sense of frustration and exhaustion. It's not just about physical independence, either. The mental and emotional independence that erodes in a long-term relationship can also be over time. Individuals in a relationship begin to share opinions and thoughts to such an extent that they no longer feel entirely in touch with their own unique perspectives. Instead, thoughts and decisions become influenced by years of compromise and negotiation. People in long-term relationships may not even realize how much their thought processes have been shaped by the needs of the other person until they experience the freedom of making decisions without these constant adjustments. Being alone in our later years offers an opportunity to reconnect with our own thoughts and desires. It provides the space to embrace the autonomy that was once constrained by the demands of partnership. When you're no longer concerned with coordinating your schedule with someone else's or negotiating where to spend holidays, you regain a sense of control over your own life. There is a mental clarity that comes from living without needing to consider someone else's preferences or reactions before taking action. In old age, many find that the greatest gift is the ability to live freely, without the constraints that come with maintaining a relationship. The freedom to pick up new hobbies without consultation, the ability to travel spontaneously, or simply the chance to sit quietly without feeling the need to entertain or accommodate another person becomes incredibly fulfilling. This independence is not just about living alone, it's about regaining the space to make choices based solely on what brings you joy, without any hidden expectations or obligations. As we age, the desire for independence becomes one of the most precious aspects of life. It's not about rejecting love or companionship, but recognizing that the ability to make choices without external influence is a vital part of what makes later years truly fulfilling. Many older individuals, when given the opportunity to live independently, find that it is not loneliness they experience, but a profound sense of freedom and peace. It's a liberation that can only be fully appreciated when we realize just how much of our autonomy was previously given up in the name of maintaining a partnership. As we age, we often find ourselves in relationships that were once filled with companionship, joy, and support. However, with the passage of time, many people begin to notice a shift in the emotional dynamics of these relationships. What once felt like a source of comfort and security can slowly transform into a drain on energy and well-being. The constant need for compromise, the negotiation of preferences, and the subtle emotional sacrifices that were once easy to overlook become increasingly exhausting. What was once natural and fulfilling can eventually feel more like a burden. The emotional toll of constant compromise becomes more apparent as people grow older. Early in life, we tend to approach relationships with enthusiasm and a willingness to adjust our routines and preferences. Compromising is part of the learning process, helping us develop patience, understanding, and teamwork. But when we reach our later years, it becomes more challenging to continually make those small, seemingly insignificant sacrifices. As our energy reserves naturally decrease with age, the emotional weight of constant adjustments begins to feel heavier, and what once seemed like a necessary part of maintaining harmony now starts to feel like an unnecessary burden. Take Robert, for example, a 74-year-old man who spent decades in a marriage with his wife, constantly adjusting to her needs and preferences. Over the years, the sacrifices he made for the sake of peace accumulated, and he began to realize how much of his own desires had been pushed aside. His wife, for instance, preferred to watch loud television in the morning, a habit that he had long since learned to live with, even though he preferred quiet. These small issues, which may have seemed insignificant when they first began, slowly added up over the year. Eventually,
Robert began to feel emotionally drained, not because he didn't love his wife, but because he had been consistently compromising on his own happiness. In our younger years, we often don't realize the toll of these daily emotional sacrifices. Compromises feel like an essential part of relationship building, and the desire to maintain peace often outweighs the need to prioritize personal preferences. But as we grow older, the ability to tolerate these small emotional drains diminishes. What once felt like an acceptable part of the relationship now feels like an unnecessary and exhausting cycle. The constant emotional adjustment becomes overwhelming, leaving us feeling like we've lost a part of ourselves in the process. It's not just about the major decisions in life either. The emotional exhaustion comes from the constant negotiation over every little thing. The choice of television programs, the decision about where to go on vacation, or even the simple act of planning a daily routine. These decisions may seem trivial, but when you're making them every single day, the weight of them starts to accumulate. What was once a loving partnership built on mutual respect and compromise turns into a series of emotional transactions, where every decision feels like a negotiation rather than an organic choice. This process of constant compromise, while seemingly harmless at first, can gradually erode the joy that comes with companionship. It's easy to overlook the emotional cost of maintaining a relationship until you experience the alternative: solitude. When Robert's wife passed away, he found himself in a place where, for the first time in decades, he didn't have to constantly compromise. He could choose what to do with his time without needing to consider anyone else's preferences or needs. The sense of freedom that came with this independence was eye-opening for him. He realized that he had been unknowingly carrying the emotional weight of constant compromise, and in stepping away from that dynamic, he felt a deep sense of relief. This emotional exhaustion isn't something that only happens in unhappy relationships. Many people in long-term loving relationships experience this drain over time. The idea of constantly negotiating your own preferences, even in the smallest ways, can eventually become exhausting. This constant balancing act can be particularly overwhelming for older individuals, who may feel like they have little energy left to navigate these emotional complexities. The result is a growing sense of fatigue, where the emotional rewards of the relationship are no longer enough to counterbalance the emotional effort required to maintain it. The truth is, as we age, we have the right to prioritize our own happiness and well-being. Relationships are meant to enhance our lives, not exhaust us. In old age, the peace that comes from making decisions without the emotional strain of constant compromise is one of the greatest luxuries. Imagine waking up every day without the need to adjust your preferences to suit someone else's, or making decisions without having to explain or justify them. This mental clarity, the ability to simply exist without the emotional burden of constant adjustment, is something that many people find incredibly refreshing when they experience it for the first time. This is not to say that relationships are inherently bad or that they are not worth maintaining. However, as we get older, it becomes more important to evaluate whether a relationship still serves our emotional needs. If the compromises required by the relationship are no longer adding value or joy to our lives, then it might be time to reconsider whether the emotional energy invested is worth the return. The emotional weight of constant compromise can gradually chip away at our sense of peace, and in some cases, it can make us feel like we've lost ourselves in the process of trying to make someone else happy. As we reflect on the complexities of relationships in our later years, it's clear that while companionship can offer love and support, it can also come with emotional burdens, loss of independence, and the exhaustion of constant compromise. Aging presents a unique opportunity to reassess our lives, our desires, and what truly brings us peace. Whether you choose to remain in a relationship or embrace solitude, the key is ensuring that your choices serve your well-being and happiness. True fulfillment in later life comes from living authentically, making decisions based on your own desires, and freeing yourself from unnecessary emotional strain. If you find yourself in a relationship that no longer enhances your life, it's okay to step back and prioritize yourself. On the other hand, if your relationship continues to bring you joy, nurture it with the understanding that the balance between love and personal autonomy is crucial. At the end of the day, your golden years should be about peace, independence, and doing what brings you the most fulfillment. Good luck on your journey of self-discovery and happiness. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on these important insights. And remember that no matter the path you choose, It's all about creating a life that aligns with your true desire. Thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best as you move forward with wisdom and peace in your heart. Thanks for joining us today. If you found this video insightful, share your thoughts with us in the comments below. What's one thing you learned? And how do you plan to use it in your own life? Your feedback motivates us to keep creating content that empowers and informs. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue creating valuable content. Until next time, take care.